All right, our last official speaker, I see he's already up here. So welcome, Mark Redmond. He's going to do an RDAR research funding update. Maybe it won't take 45 minutes. Yeah, we'll see. All right, welcome.
I will not take 45 minutes. I will accelerate my way through a large slide deck, which was a fly past. In fact, I could probably arrange to not show you anything by giving you some good news. I missed part of this afternoon's speeches because I was talking to our board chair, and he actually told me to pass some excellent news on to our association members. We started the morning with Grant Rutherford mentioning that the minister is extremely pleased with the work of this group and others, and there was an extra line in last week's budget to increase RDAR funding. And I'm happy to say that the associations are going to receive $4 million. So now I'll just take questions. No. No, that is great news. And I will say I attended this meeting yesterday online. I was really delighted with the work that's been done by the associations and their planning. I think there are great things to come in the future. And why am I getting feedback? Oh, fair enough. I don't think I can speak any louder or more into the microphone. So what the theme, Doug had asked if I could just pull together what others are doing and where RDAR fits, and actually where all of your work fits. I don't actually have to recap a lot of the great presentations. There was a lot of RDAR funded this, so I'm not going to cover those off. What I'm going to say, though, is this year and the next 2 or 3 years is going to very much be a year of convergence. We have all of these different programs, and as you've been sitting in the audience hearing about living labs and off-CAF, and we got RALP coming up, Resilient Agriculture Landscape Program. John Conrad advised me, well, in addition to those 4, we've got a farm tech program. So a lot of new technologies coming forward that you'll be able to get access to, and also grain handling. And so our job within RDAR is to collect all of these different opportunities and make them into a cohesive picture. I'm going to make the PDF of this slide deck available. So if you can't read everything, there's some small, it was actually made to be printed. So some of the themes you've heard just in the last hour in terms of how important the network is, the data collection, and how we can share data and make sense of it. And what RDAR has spent the last 2 years doing is looking for gaps. And so you'll see the presentation, particularly towards the end, we've identified some gaps. So let's start moving quickly. In our strategic framework, you'll see we talk about ESG. So we've been talking a lot about the environment today, social structure in terms of business in our rural areas, governance. All of that requires a healthy economy. And our message has been driven in the last 2 years, I think, more by the ESG than the economy and the ability to earn. We need to pay attention to that, and that is the lens I take with RDAR. So quickly, we'll do some hindsight, oversight, foresight, and insight. What does all that mean? So you can read this pretty quickly. I'll come to the numbers. You can see that we are investing in 2023, $38.5 million in research. It's a lot of money. It's not easy to actually find good projects to invest in. We also have about $36 million in off-CAF funding. So as producers, you'll like off-CAF funding in terms of it pays 80% of costs for you to try new BMPs, and it lowers the barrier, it lowers the risk for you to try new BMPs. So where has our budget gone? You'll see we have 4 sectors of activity. Profitability, and these were actually selected by producers. Profitability, sustainability, I'll come back to that in a moment, marketing and extension. And in the bottom, your right, there you'll see our current portfolio. Beef is really underrepresented in terms of profitability for the province and farm income. We're going to look to boost that gap, and to do that, we need to look at better beef projects. And as Saria says, you can't have beef without forage. So that's today's story. A further difference with RDAR is we measure everything. In the past, grants have been given out, not looked at for any results. This has been stood on its head, and so as we get reports coming in from our projects, we had to go back and evaluate them. One of the key metrics that we are looking at, and you'll hear RDAR talking a lot about in the next short while, is the final mile. So it used to be when we were evaluating projects, my test was, after reading this, and I look back, can I see the farm? In many cases, no, we couldn't. And this has actually gone a little bit further in terms of when we look at the research, is it producer ready? Is it ready to go into the hands of the producer to put into practice? And that was one of the questions that we had just before this talk, in terms of how many of these projects result in BMPs or standard operating procedures. That is an absolute test. If we're funding this work, it has to be a deliverable, and the producer has to benefit. And that is a big change of research, and it's a big change in the attitude of researchers. And this takes a team. And so you'll see this satellite diagram that actually shows the development of an idea. So those ideas are given from consultations with you, with the public, with other influences, leads to developing projects. Those are done within the academic community, put into the rural area, and we go plot to farm. What are the results? What's the adoption rate like? And then we go around again. So this particular model is stolen. I'm very happy to steal things from the living labs. And so living labs historically, and this is pre-Canada getting involved in living labs, they talk about T4P. And in our language, the T is transdisciplinary, and the 4P, producers, private, public partnership. And so why is that different to the way research has been done in the past? In the past, you've had somebody come up with an idea, they'll go to an academic and say to the academic, here's what I like. The academic says, great, I'll take that, I'll work on it, come back in 3 years. You come back in 3 years and it's not what you wanted. So T4P team is very much a team. You work together, you work through rapid iterative developments of concepts, and you get onto the farm as quickly as you can. This is actually borrowing from the electronics business, where you go through agile cycles, so you work very, very quickly. Why that fits today, particularly into agriculture, I won't say into beef breeding, but crop breeding, it no longer takes 10 years to get a variety. Using new tools, you can go a lot faster. So this system really is fit for today. So, quick commercial. OFCAF for next year is open. I think we've already got 300 applications in the system. Why is OFCAF beneficial to you guys? It is another rapid program in terms of how can we get more producers to try new things with the BMPs. So OFCAF lends its way to that. We're one of, I think, 13 initiatives funding projects across the Canada. 12.3 million last year, and you can actually see significant amount of activity in the rotational grazing, about 40% of our work. Nitrogen use, important. What's really sad though, and it doesn't come out on this particular graph, is the cover cropping activity. It's only about $800,000 worth, so that's a gap. We're not quite sure why that happened. We're going to be looking into that. This is just by the numbers. You can see good coverage in terms of hectares of activity. We have more than 680 approved applications. The average check that we're busy writing right now on behalf of the government, about $38,000. And we have, according to Agriculture Canada codes, over 80 BMPs which are being covered. So if you're interested in the activity, go online, the details are there. Coverage of the province, and this is a random sampling. It's actually the first 116 checks that we issued. So you can see that we are active across the province in terms of people interested in trying new things. If you go back and think about 40% of those activities being rotational grazing, we're seeing good take up by the beef community. Plus we do have our other colleagues working in similar fields. So there are lots of people trying some new things. Just in terms of how we cover the province, between off-calf and field days, this is a particular activity I really enjoyed in terms of plot to farm. We get out and about and meet with you. So the chance to talk to RDAR is not limited to this occasion. We'll be out and visiting you later in the year. So changing up the way we do things now. A gap, thinking back to our big circle, a gap that we recognized is how we gather our information in terms of where research priorities are. When RDAR was formed in 2020, we had consultations with producers and they told us, we want you to focus on productivity, sustainability, marketing, and extension. That level of categorization wasn't granular enough for us to know where we should be spending our money, your money. So what we are doing is we're commencing developing what we call sector tables. So these will be specific advisory groups, and building on the advice that RDAR receives from the sector tables, we're going to be building transdisciplinary clusters. The sector tables, you'll see beef is the first. We are going to have others coming out. The rollout of those particular tables really is limited by our capacity to do things. So this is where we can look at the associations, we can look at other groups such as AFIN in terms of how can you help us roll out some of these tables so that we actually begin to build clusters doing the right work. So the clusters, we're funding 3 this year as a rollout. You can see $10 million over 3 years. Beef will be the first cluster, looking at genetics. So some of the work that Ed just told us about in terms of selecting breeding stock and also forage, so the whole feed strategy. And so I was delighted today when, as the starting item, we had the provincial forage strategy, the first forage strategy in over 10 years. We'll follow that up with a feed strategy, so to build that out as well. See a couple of other areas. The living labs, when they were formed, we were encouraging maximum number of living labs. Originally, Alberta was only going to get 1. We're happy when it was 3. But the irrigation district was missed, and there's a significant amount of activity down there. So we're going to make up that gap from RDAR, and then everything we've been hearing about for the last 2 days, soil health, we'll be looking to form a cluster in those areas. So that's a big change from the way research has been done in the province, and will lead to, I think, better results, faster results in the future. It's just a little more detail on the clusters. Let's say I'll make the deck available. You can read that. So irrigation, looking at some of the deliverables there. Soil health, various measurables. You've heard about it today in terms of minimizing soil disturbance. So all going to be keys. And then we'll get into some of the bit more discussion around the beef and dairy cluster, where I do see us being able to return significant benefits to the beef industry within 5 years. So a pivotal part, and this say will be an overview, pivotal part of this work will be genetics, but not genetics restricted solely to the bovine itself. We'll be looking at the microbiome, the ability of the rumen to digest, but also where we're going to get the methane production, how we can lower that in terms of greenhouse gases, but also feed. And so that leads us very nicely into the work that we have been talking about today in terms of plant breeding, what the right mix is in terms of animal feed and forage. So this is where we can, as background to some of those research initiatives that we'll be starting. This is where OFCAF can actually help advise us, as well as looking at our research database. So RDAR at present is managing almost 500 programs or projects. That is a very large number of projects. But we can really take a look at where we are finding interest, again, looking for gaps. And so we did talk about some of the insect pest products in our alfalfa and with our leaf cutter bees this morning. You'll see that that is part of our portfolio of projects we're investing in. What is a major gap from my perspective is the whole forage breeding. And, you know, that's an area that I'm going to be encouraging change. This one, we won't go into detail again. This is out of our, one difference that RDAR has from the way research has been done in the past, we have a database called Argo. So every time you put a research proposal into RDAR, it generates one of these reports, and we can go and very quickly get an assessment in terms of what we're spending where. So you can see on forage alone, almost $3.6 million, 23 different projects. And Laura, if you want the list, I mean, you're in there anyway, but I will give, I actually have that as a separate page. So a change this year, and just giving us some baseline data, is the way the regional variety trials are being done for silage. So the same group who are performing and analyzing the grain regional variety trials are going to be conducting baseline studies on the forage crops. You can see some statistics though in terms of for the last 3 years, we've been doing a lot of trials here in Alberta, and we haven't quite had the data consistency that we're looking at. So we're going to contract studies until we can get a stable baseline of measurements. And we'll be doing trials across 6 locations this year using different crops. And Doug, you were asking about activity in oats and barley. We are going to be including those in these studies as well. So we have 2 sites in the south, including one under irrigation. Field Crop Development Center is going to be doing some of the work, as will Lara. You can help, is it going to be Grow or Battle River? And then we're going to be looking at one site in the north. So really focusing on quality of results and getting good baseline data, which will then lend its way to new studies of mixtures. Okay, forage strategy. I will admit, Alan, we began talking about this a year ago, and I was getting really antsy in terms of, I've not seen anything, I've not seen anything. I'm really happy with what we've got. I took a read of it. You can see that some of the even better ifs, and so I in terms of strategic plans, I always prefer a framework, meaning we can build on it, coupling some of the variety development that we need, as well as a feed strategy. As Ed said, we need to know how animals do when they're being fed. We also had the appetite for the animals to be consuming the different forages. We need to be streamlining our production so it meets all of those requirements of the right forage for the right animal. So a surprising discovery last year, for me anyway. Alberta hasn't had any forage crops developed for our own environment. The alfalfas we grow were grown in other districts. We are looking at some of the hardier varieties of alfalfa, which seem to do fairly well here, but nothing specifically grown. Similarly, chicory, we're looking at a project in terms of increasing chicory stances. When we looked at the study, the animal side of the feeding would have been fine. Producing enough chicory to feed the animals would not have been possible. And so we need better perennial chicory crops, vetch. Those are just two that we've had highlighted. We actually need somebody to stand up, or we need to have a scientist put into a group to develop these varieties for us. And so this will be a longer term commitment, but to improve the quality of the forages that we have to feed our industry. Yeah. So when I was putting this presentation together, my wife saw this slide and she said, "Oh, dirty 30s." And I said, "No, dirty 20s. Brooks, Alberta 2021, Tabor, Alberta 2022. You can see about 18 inches of topsoil being blown against these granaries. The statistic which came from Farming Smarter, though, in terms of the loss of nitrogen for an inch of topsoil, that really surprised me. If we think about the cuts that we're being asked to make with respect to fertilizer, you can see the quick calculations there in terms of pounds per acre. Wind erosion is costing us significant opportunities. And for our businesses, particularly in the south of the province with potatoes, Alberta last year, Canada's largest potato producer, but all those fields are left bare. And so we need better cover crops. McCain's, and this is, again, when I'm thinking about the T4Ps, so the public-private producer partnerships, McCain's being one of the privates, they are looking to support regenerative agriculture. Yesterday, we heard with the farm plans that for potatoes, the potato growers of Alberta are demanding that you have a environmental farm plan. McCain's is on this too. One of my objectives then is to bring McCain's to the province to be working with us in these areas. And you'll see the deliverables there in terms of more cover cropping, integration of livestock into potato operations. These are all going to be key for the future of agriculture. And by 2030, McCain's are going to be demanding all of their products are produced sustainably. And so that fits into the public side of our work in terms of the demands the public have for product and how are we set up to meet the demands of the customer. So just to show this is not retrospective work, but or it's not prospective work in terms of what we're doing in the future. We've already got producers engaged in these activities. The grouped farm here, Gibbons, half of their potato crop next year will be under cover. And that was actually funded under OFCAF. I will say that two of the gentlemen in the picture actually come from Agriculture Canada. And so we drew the people who are setting the legislation to talk to us to see actually what these programs are doing, with the objective of seeing a sustained engagement in supporting programs such as OFCAF and Living Labs. There's nothing like coming out and seeing how the projects are actually run. Neat thing about OFCAF, a bit like some of the Living Labs, you can try things which otherwise you wouldn't. So here we have Southern Alberta, dry bean crop. Plane flying over, and you could actually hear the sprinkling of this is fall rye being seeded, and the follow-up on this study, this actually was an experiment run in the fall. There was good cover from the rye that sprouted. The rye was actually seeded prior to the last pass of the irrigation, so there was enough moisture to get the crop started. So you can see with OFCAF, providing your beneficial management practice fits the requirements of the program, you can try different activities. I was questioning the seeding rate here, and actually the same process is now being adapted to drones. Okay, Ed spoke to you a little bit about rotational grazing. Neat thing here, not limited to cattle. We're also working with bison. Some of the metrics in terms of better water infiltration that you can see. So this is all doing the right thing. I don't think Linda's with us today. I put this slide in the deck actually because this particular operation with the sitches used to be an elk ranch. And so with the challenges of chronic wasting disease, they've actually moved over to bison very successfully and now practicing rotational grazing. Yeah, this one you know about. This one, shout out to Amber and Steve in terms of some of the trials underway this wintertime in terms of swath grazing. Part of the questions that we've had in RDAR is for soil sampling or activities which are going on over the wintertime. When the window runs for applications between April and October, how do we cover wintertime? You just actually have to get your application into the system in that time frame, and you can carry on the work over the wintertime. So similarly, if you want to be doing soil sampling, best time to be doing that is in the fall. You just need to be in the system. So just to clarify that point. Whoops, yep, so this is heading for home. So this is the final message that I'd like us to think about and to work on in the next little while. We need to own our own narrative. We need to know how to tell our stories. We're not good at that. Scientists, with the exception of the speakers today, generally aren't good at getting the message across to the government, across to the public. So we need to find a way of telling our message. If we think about the imposition of environmental restraints on agriculture, well, tell the truth. Those were set by Agriculture Canada scientists, many of them in Ottawa, who haven't been on a farm. They've based studies on work they've done in the laboratory. They've not been out in the field. If we think about the accusations that have been made in terms of Canadian agriculture being dirty, or agriculture as a whole being a negative on the environment, a lot of that data was based on averages from Europe and other more intensive areas in Canada, Eastern Canada. So intensity farming needs to be accounted for. And so some of those metrics, I think it was Ed had at the end of his study there in terms of the greenhouse gas contribution of cattle and farming, of the potential for sequestration. We need to get our message down how to do that. And so we're going to be working with all of you on that. I know the associations do a good job promoting that, but we need to tell the public. They need to understand our story. And so from our perspective at RDAR, we're looking to bring all of these different groups together. We can say we're breaking down silos amongst academic institutions. We're looking at ways of linking up different parts of the province, and we're looking to accelerate the adoption of new techniques in agriculture. So I will leave it there. As I say, I'll make the slide deck available. There are some details. If you have other questions about specific projects, be happy to mine that data for you.
And don't forget about the people online. If there are any questions, we need a microphone. And Amber is going to pass that around right now as soon as we get it ready. And we'll check and see if there's anybody online that also needs to answer a question. Nobody online so far. Anybody in the room? Okay.
Mark, if you could go to your slide that you've got the commodities in your research priorities. You'll hear my whiskers. My question is, you've certainly lumped things around commodities.
This one?
Is it an oversight that you've left out the socioeconomic, the culture, the management component that it takes to implement those technologies? You talked about research being farm ready. The question is the farm ready for the research? And are you packaging your research dollars to handle or address the management component of the people in addition to all the gee whiz technology that you're funding?
I'm actually not sure I agree with the premise of your question in terms of the gee whiz technology. By us focusing on delivering innovations, creations to the hands of the farmer, we're completing that final mile. So that management piece, it's going to be built into all proposals. We're changing our grant forms. You may see the final mile being referred to as the final mile, but we want to see evidence of how you are going to put this into practice. The T4P teams, knowing that not everybody is the same, but by having a producer on the team and working with that particular person or that particular group, I think is going to make sure that we have people trained in using the technique. The other piece is, if we're developing something for you, it's actually going to fit your hand, not my hand. You're the guy who's going to be using it. And so that change of relationship is a case of giving you what you need as opposed to telling you what you need. So nothing without you is an expression we use in healthcare. And we want to see that, and yes, I'm borrowing from experience, we want to see that delivered to the farm. And so how do we communicate that? I mentioned the plot to farm. We can also talk about field to farm. Those are great programs in terms of, you've got the gee whiz guys in terms of Jeremy Boychuk, brilliant, but he'll sit down with you, sit down with the environmental farm plan, sit down with the crop plan and say, okay, here's what we're going to try. And then you go and measure what it is, you look at the results, and then you know whether you're going to adopt. I love the fact that a number of the associations were saying, we're going to get out from the test plots and get into the field with our producers. That's really what I got excited about that in terms of that's why I dreamt of. You guys are thinking about it already. And so for us to get behind you in terms of delivering those programs, getting the producers, an example from the dairy world, one of our directors, JP Brewer, adopted different genetics in his dairy barn. Phenomenal results. And the talk is in the coffee shop. What's JP doing? I mean, we can have meetings like this, but actually the most effective communication is probably at the coffee shop, because they're all copying him now. So how can we create these communities of practice and share these great results? But we want to be sure that the results are solid and the results are good. That's where engaging you is going to be key. And by the way, these commodities and these sections, they came from producers, but did they represent everybody? And that's what we're going to get at now with our tables.
Good
Yes.
afternoon. Thanks for your talk. I was just curious if you could comment on the project that you are planning to move forward with developing new varieties of alfalfa and testing them in Alberta. I was just curious, kind of, what are you viewing as the gaps? Like, what is missing? What is, maybe if you could just expand on that.
So that work is being piloted in a number of locations across the province. We're not funding it yet. It's something I came across in the literature and was identified as a need. What I'm looking for is better overwintering. So if we're looking at a perennial, how are we going to make sure we have strong, healthy growth year after year? I'm not the expert. If you can say, well, how do the bees like it? I actually had an education last year talking to your executive director in terms of the whole leaf cutter bee activity. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about the shipping parts of it. And by the way, we've still not had any projects on leaf cutter bees come forward. But certainly, I mean, this is where we need expertise, and we aren't the experts. So as we put together the forage research table, maybe it's part of beef, you need to be telling us, got the experts in the room here. Here's the current faults. Here's where we need improvements. Here's where we can do it. And then we need to have the people who can do that hands-on work that we're missing in the province right now. So post-secondary institutes, Ag Canada, who can be doing that work for us? Could it be the group up at Beaver Lodge?
I think in terms of the leafcutter bee aspect, which you mentioned, there's certainly gaps throughout the chain. If you look at the Bee Act of Alberta, it only outlines honeybees. So there's certainly missing links, and we often find that there are missed connections with being able to collaborate with different groups. Certainly something I'm learning as well. Yeah, thank you for your answer.
Well, and the leaf cutters are essential to such an important industry. And to your point, we have a good portfolio of honeybee research. We've got Dr. Hoover in Lethbridge. How do we support your group? And I know, was it 3 years ago, there were issues over wintering, so Medicine Hat College stepped in. How do we make sure that all of our pollinators are addressed in terms of our total community?
Just checking and see if anybody online has any questions, and it doesn't look like they do. Nobody else in the room?
Thank you very much.